but you wasn't always in this place. You ought to tell that neighbor, I'm so glad that I was blind, but thank God I can see. But it didn't stop there. The Bible declares that there was a dark hour when Jesus hung on the cross. There was a dark hour when Jesus gave up the ghost. He died for you, and he died for me. The Bible says that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him, Mama down south would have said, whosoever believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And what does that tell you? I'll tell you what it tells me, that his love was so blinded that it didn't care how bad I was. His beloved was so blinded it didn't care how rough I was. His blood, it didn't care how bad a shape I was in. But he died for the worst of the worst. But the Bible said, wow, we were yet sinners. He died for you, and he died for me. Oh, what love the Father had bestowed upon you and I, that we might have a right to the tree of life. He hung from the 6th to the 9th hour. He hung till the earth got dark. He hung until he hung his head and died. He hung till he gave up the ghost. The Bible says that they broke the legs of the two other thieves to hasten their death. But when they came to Jesus to break his legs, they said he's already dead, because the scripture had to be fulfilled that not one bone in his body should be broken. But the soldier, he got smart and said, well, he already dead, but let me just pierce him. Let me just jab him in his side. But the soldier didn't know that was the birthing of the New Testament church, because out of his side came blood and water. Water for my baptism and blood for my redemption. They took the body down because it was the Passover. They put him in a borrowed tomb. The first night passed and the first morning came, but nothing happened. Everything was surreal at the tomb of Jesus. The second night passed and the second morning came, and everything was serene. The third night passed, but early, I said early, on the third day morning, there was an earthquake at the tomb of Jesus. There was a shaking, there was a quaking, there was a rumbling, there was a tumbling. The earth began to reel, and it began to rock, and God dispatched an angel from heaven. And how many of y'all know that when God sends help to you, that everything has got to be all right? Somebody shout, Jesus is not dead. Somebody shout, Jesus is not dead, but Jesus is alive. And the angel went to the tomb and rolled back the stone away, and up out of the grave came Jesus. He said, no man take my life. I got power to lay it down. I got power to take it up again. I dare you to give that neighbor a high five and tell him, neighbor, I'm so glad that he's not dead. He's yet alive. The Bible says that Peter and the disciples went to the tomb. They saw it was empty, but they thought that he had been stolen. But Mary Magdalene, she ran to the tomb. She was ready to spice his body and to prepare it. She looked in the tomb and was distraught. But the Bible says there was an angel in the tomb. He said, why seek ye the living among the dead? She said, don't play with me. Just tell me where they laid his body. Just tell me where they took him, and I'll go get him myself. And just that quick, Jesus walked up on her and said, woman, why are you crying? She was blinded with sorrow. Didn't even know who Jesus was. She was blinded with her tears. She was blinded with her hearing. She was blinded with bereavement. But Jesus called her name. He said, Mary. And when he called her, her eyes opened up. She wanted to touch him. But he said, Mary, don't touch me. I have not ascended unto my Father. But this is one thing you can do. Go and tell Peter and the rest of my disciples to meet me in Galilee. And somebody this morning ought to tell that neighbor, I'm so glad that Jesus is alive. I'm so glad that Jesus is yet living. I'm so glad that Jesus is in the room. Somebody asked, why couldn't Mary touch Jesus? Why couldn't Mary hug Jesus? Why couldn't Mary hold on to Jesus? Because the scripture had to be fulfilled and the work had to be accomplished. Jesus had not completed the work. He had died a few days early. 3 days he went into the heart of the earth. 3 days he went into the belly of the earth and preached captivity captive. But before he could fellowship with his disciples, he had to ascend back up to the Father and take the blood that was shed for you and the blood that was shed for me and sprinkle it on the mercy seat. Before Jesus could touch anybody, he had to ascend. And that's why Paul picked it up and said, we got a high priest who is passed into the heaven. He went past the holy place. He went behind the veil. He went into the holy of holies. And he took the blood and sprinkled it on the mercy seat. And now you and me can live on the blind side. Tell that neighbor, I'm so glad that I'm living on the blind side. Give that neighbor a high five and tell them, neighbor, I'm so glad that I'm living on the blind side. For I walk by faith and not by sight. When you're living on the blind side, you call those things that be not as though they are. When you're living on the blind side, you can see the invisible. When you're living on the blind side, you're blind to fear. You're blind to unbelief. You're blind to doubt. You're blind to gloom. You're blind to failure. You're blind to confusion. You're blind to depression. You're blind to name calling. You're blind to what people think. But when you're living on the blind side, where he leads me, I will follow. When you're living on the blind side, you can see the goodness of God in the midst of a troubled time. I dare somebody that's walking, that's living on the blind side, to give that neighbor a high five and tell them, neighbor, I can see the impossible.